I just wanted to introduce this new demo with a question from some guy person. He asks, is it just me or do NVIDIA's neural faces and that text to animation feature look absolutely dreadful? Well, some guy person, we aren't going to talk about the text to animation feature today, but we can talk about NVIDIA's neural faces because we actually saw a couple of demos that featured the neural face technology, and I think that our impressions were broadly a little bit more positive than what some guy person is implying here.
Yeah, so there's a bit of context to this. The demo, the change that you saw on the stage, as well as in any of the press material, was a version of it that we didn't see. We saw one that they were literally working on up until 5 minutes before we came and looked at the demo. They literally just like had finished compiling the EXE or whatever to actually do it, because they were literally working on it right before. And now this is not an actual feature that is going to be shipped in games, because this is still work in progress, and this is the future of what they want to try and do. And what we saw on this model right here, specifically, like with the thing that they showed in the original demo on stage with Jensen, as well as in I think in any of the press materials that might have come out at this point, I will say it was almost like a Yazify filter. Like it did look like the hire the gamers please filter kind of thing. Now, this joke you've heard before of like people were like,
Nintendo hire this man.
Yeah, like the total like I used AI to fix this game kind of thing. And it did give off that vibe totally. Like there was like a visible change in almost facial structure of the person. It like almost looked like it was adding makeup to them. It's like a very specific thing. But this one right here, I would say specifically the first one, it was much more kept after the update we saw. We saw the updated version of it, and as it flips back and forth, you can totally see that the exact style of the face is actually extremely similar. Mm-hmm. It is not changing style on face, actually, like you saw in the original demo. So I think that was just like an earlier version. And actually here, when we flip back and forth between it, what you have to think about this here is like the entire scene this is using Unreal Engine 5 here. Yeah. And it's using the path tracing version of it. But when they put on the face, almost like a deep fake, it is not doing any rendering, traditional rendering at all. The entire face, including the shadows, the shading, the animation movement, is all being done via a machine learning rendering. And that is something we haven't really seen at all before, ever, actually, in real time in games. So this is completely and wholly unique. Some things when you switch back and forth, like I said, it's not really Yazify filter. Like it's really not that. And like a good way to show that is that like you can actually see that the subsurface scattering changes between the views. Like it is actually doing things to improve the surface shading model of the character. It is going to be changing the way the eyes respond to light. It's going to be doing a lot of these things. Now, the reason why I say this is still super work in progress, and I'm actually kind of happy they showed it off like this, because they're realizing like we want to have artists to have more control over this. We want to make sure that it is actually representing the base mesh, like the perfect mesh of the actress or actor who it's modeled after. That's why they say it's work in progress. And they, for example, they purposely didn't move the camera in the scene to certain angles because they said like, we know this isn't perfect yet. Like you could technically see a seam on one side of the head where the face is superimposed.
Right.
And they didn't want to show that, like, so, yeah, I thought this demo specifically looked really, really great. Then we also saw like the interactive AI demo too, where they used the same thing. I think a different actress there though, whoever was scanned. Now this one shows a little bit more,
significant change.
More significant change between the face. But I would say there was a level of naturalism, though, in the movement of when she was talking to you that I appreciated. And yeah, that's one thing they are keenly aware. Like they asked us, like, what do you think? I was asked multiple times, like, what do you think of this type of demo? And I was saying, like, what I would like to see is I like the proof of concept, but I don't think it should radically change the facial structure of a person. It should be kept within artist's intent. And, it should only be a positive thing to bring us closer to ground truth. And that's how they saw it too. And they see this as a heavily work in progress thing. And they don't want to have it be like the ugly, AI generated stuff you can find on the web. They want it to be good. So that's the way I kind of look at this. They're showing us the future in a work in progress form.
Yeah, I did actually find this a little bit interesting because in high-end CG productions, they've recently taken to using similar techniques, often termed somewhat pejoratively, but I'll use it in neutral context here as deep faking, where basically you have an extremely high-end, extremely expressive, fully CG face, like in the Star Wars films, or for instance in the recent Harrison Ford Indiana Jones movie, not the game, but the movie, where they need to basically depict someone, in many cases, who is quite a bit older, perhaps, or who has passed away, and they need to depict them with basically a CG character, but it needs to look extremely close to the original likeness because people have a very firm idea of how that person looks, and people are also extremely finely attuned to the physicality of the human face. They actually find that even with this very high-end CG, that when they apply this deep faking process to the face, they can actually just get that little bit further, that little bit closer to reality, and have people accept that face as a real life face instead of something that is like, that's just a little bit off, like with Tarkin in Rogue One, for instance,
Yeah.
where it's just a little bit off, it's just that tiniest bit off, and you can kind of tell that it's not a genuine face. And in this case, you're getting that level of naturalism, I think, in the face. There is, some amount to which you could say, that's a Yassify filter. I think that was certainly somewhat more true for the other demo and not for the first one. But in general, it's a more natural looking face. It's a less gamey looking face. And I think ultimately, like it does look quite pleasing there. So I think this brings us a little bit closer to that ideal of having very realistic human facial portrayals. Now, obviously, this is very much a work in progress. And like you said, the Yassify element of it probably does need to be tuned to some degree. And there probably does need to be some level of artist control that is quite consistent there. But I thought it was quite a compelling demo. But Alex, that wasn't the only element of this demo that caught your particular attention. There's also the hair rendering in this demo.
Right.
So explain that to me.
This one is interesting because ray tracing hair is really hard. The modern hair techniques in games, if they use splines, usually not the entire head is done with splines, but like at a certain distance, it'll LOD change to cards. It'll be mixed cards and splines. Splines are tiny little strands of geometry. Sometimes these strands are not rendered with like the usual hardware on a GPU, but they're done with a compute shader. But the whole point is trying to trace against tons of tiny, thin bits of geometry.
It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, and like some of the ways they would try and cheat that would be to extrude the length of the triangle. But then it becomes like increasingly ridiculous to trace against then. Like there's a whole lot of reasons why tracing tiny, thin little pieces of geometry is ridiculous. So their solution here is a new primitive to ray trace against. So there's a lot of things you can ray trace against. You can ray trace against voxels, you can ray trace against triangles, but another thing you can ray trace against is like spheres, and they're calling these Lanczos spheres. Basically, they're like little connected spheres and hemispheres at the end of like long lines. That's like a way to describe them. And they're much more simple to trace against. They're really fast, apparently. And this is a new thing to RTX, and it allows for much more efficient visualizing of the hair, as well as much quicker trace time against the hair. So in this demo, they said the art wasn't finished for the demo for the hair, but it used the new technique to render the hair, which gave, it would give you things like perfect shadows from hair. It would also give you like, just like way better lighting in the hair itself too, because it's now being path traced against instead of being done through typical rasterization lighting or something like that. And that's usually a disconnect in games, because sometimes there's been games with like path tracing, but not the hair. It's not path traced to the same level or whatever. So this is
like in Indie.
Like in Indie, like I pointed out back in Indie. And I think Indie, based upon the press release, is getting this RTX hair. Yeah, I think that was a thing they showed in the press release. So this should be coming to a game near us soon enough. But right now, I believe, it's just a new way to do hair and a new way to do ray tracing. And it's not just limited to hair, the style of tracing. It could be technically applied to different other types of, I wouldn't call them materials, but different like things that have volume and whatnot. Like there was hints that it could be used for a lot of other things than just hair, which is awesome. So this is another thing that'll make ray tracing faster and be applied to more objects.